from the blackest corners of your mind, they call, pulling you deep into shadow, twisting your senses, keeping you from sleep. It's time to face your darkest fears. This is Tales to Terrify. Good evening, children of the night, and welcome to another Flashback. This week we have a tiny little bite-sized tale for you from episode 274, which aired back in April 28th, 2017. I won't say too much, because I feel like the title really says it all. So, children of the night, join me for Karlo Yeager Rodriguez's Clown Car, Driven Once, Never Emptied.
The fucking salesman promised the car was clean. Dan's knuckles creaked as he clutched his steering wheel like salvation, eyes on shifting traffic on the rain-soaked highway. They were all around him, furtive movements in the hidden spaces of the car, the rustle as they moved under the back seat, the stifled titters echoing from inside the glove box, the squeak of red plastic noses crushed against each other. The car was still full of them. Dan didn't dare look away from the lane ahead, squinting past the steady swish of the wipers to the snarl of fast-moving cars on the expressway. No sirens? No flashing lights in the rear view? Good. Back at the dealership, the salesman had oozed up to Dan, who stared at the jaundiced yellow VW Bug. "I can see you're a collector," he'd crooned, and nodded at the horrid little lump of a car contained by the circle of velvet ropes. Like one of those magic circles, Dan had thought. "It's from that show," Dan had gulped. "Uncle Hasty's?" "Sure," the salesman nodded, and his smile grew stale as his eyes flicked between the Bug and Dan. "A good price, too." Dan nodded and looked back across the street where the police cars' blue and red lights flashed like a ballyhoo over the arch, the arcade, the big top. He needed to make a getaway. Aversion therapy. Dan had shuddered at the thought. On the highway, a shadow fell over the car. An 18-wheeler breached the waters of the downpour and loomed over him like a wall. Dan slammed on the brakes, palm crushed against the horn. He panted, legs trembling, and jerked his hand off the horn. Its bleeding trailed off into nothing like a deflating balloon. Faded letters framed a big top on the truck's container doors. Dan wiped at the fogged glass to peer through the rain. A smiling clown loomed over the cartoon tent like a bloated, hungry moon. Dan hurled himself backwards with a cry. He covered his face with his arms, lifted his feet off the pedals. The car lurched, shuddered, and drifted, motor dead. The rustling became louder. "You're not listening," his little girl had said, raising her voice over the laughter of the crowd around them. Dan couldn't believe Emily liked the circus, but there he was, watching a clown car loop around one of the 3 rings. Dan tilted one ear towards her. "What's that, Em?" His eyes followed the clown car, zipping over the packed dirt, wary as someone watching a large spider scurry across the floor. "What's going on between you and Mom?" Emily craned her head to look over his shoulder to where her mother had gone to find the restrooms. Dan glanced at the clown car as its doors popped open. That is, Dan stammered, "I need to go away." "Why?" Emily's face scrunched up. For how long? Dan shook his head. What he could say? The clowns tumbled out of the car, mugging for the crowds. The ring will hold them. They can't cross. The ring will hold them. The glove box popped open with a giggle. Coasting behind the semi, Dan leaned across, eyes squeezed shut. He slapped the glove box closed with a whimper. He snapped his eyes open as he heard the back seat thud into place. His gaze darted to the rearview mirror. Was the tip of an oversized red shoe sticking out like a tongue between black vinyl lips? The giggles grew into crazed shrieks before Dan remembered what could happen if the car stopped without a circle to contain them. He turned the key and pumped the gas pedal until the engine chirruped to life. He jammed the car into gear and turned to accelerate past the 18-wheeler. The sounds, the movement stopped. He flipped the painted clown face the finger as he moved past, caught in the flow of traffic again. Why? Em repeated. Why? Dan had wanted to explain how, after he'd been abandoned as a kid, it chipped away at him. How his wife could no longer love his brokenness. I don't know, honey, he said, and squeezed her hand. He'd read the reports about the day his mama disappeared. She had left him strapped in his high chair in front of the TV, the awful clown in yellow show playing. The neighbors found him, hours later in a soiled diaper, shrieking and pointing at the TV. None of reports explained what he saw. His mama transformed into a cartoon clown on TV. The clown in yellow, turning and smiling at Dan through the screen. What could he have told Em? He was cursed? Haunted by clowns? He had opened his mouth, teetered on the edge of confession, when he had felt a hand on his shoulder, a white-gloved hand. He whirled with a shriek and pounded his fists into the chalk-white face, again and again, until, panting, he'd found teeth embedded in his grease paint and blood-covered knuckles. Dan felt his blood drain as he looked at the mime sprawled at his feet, at the row of clowns lined along the edge of the ring, looking at him and smiling. He had shrunk before his wife and Em's open-mouthed horror and fled. He popped the clutch and felt a gloved hand brush his ankle. His throat clenched around a shriek. There was a clown hidden under his seat. A shiver crawled up his leg and up his back, grew into a shudder. The minute he stopped, unbound, they would tumble out of their hidey holes in the car and out into the world in wave after wave. He couldn't inflict this horror on the rest of the world. Dan revved the motor. The world would not fall under an endless stream of painted, leering faces and oceans of seltzer water. The low titters of the hidden clowns sounded quizzical as he drifted across 3 lanes of traffic.
That was Karlo Yeager Rodriguez's Clown Car, Driven Once, Never Emptied, as read by Dan Gurzynski. To listen to the full episode, and for more details about the story, the author, and the narrator, check out the link in the show notes. And as always, children of the night, stay safe and stay scared.